How to be right in a world gone wrong. James O'Brien, W.H. Allen, 2019. Many useful tips too. Explore different issues through an in-depth analysis of the most extreme points of view. Learn not to blindly accept common opinions spread by the media without questioning them. Free yourself from the chains of fear spread by misinformation and learn to ask the right questions. The author, James Edward O'Brien, is the host of a radio show on the UK station LBC. He hosts a discussion programme with his listeners on various topics such as society, current events and more. Prior to his radio career, he worked as the editor of the Daily Express gossip column, and some of his articles have been published in Cosmopolitan and Spectator. In 2015, he published a book about people's attitudes towards immigration called Loathe Thy Neighbour. Freedom of speech and of thought, and politically correct, how the meaning of these expressions has changed over the last few years. Over the last few years, the expression freedom of speech has taken on a whole new dimension, with emphasis on the right to voice one's opinion without having to justify the reasons behind it. In this new society in which we live, people feel empowered to give voice to the most appalling opinions such as racism, misogyny, homophobia, and so on. These dreadful views are often backed up by slogans that incite discord spread by the media without any longer being challenged to explain the reason for their position. Radio, television and newspapers spread the extreme opinions of institutional figureheads without ever challenging them or explaining the reasons behind them. And in doing so, they give license to the rest of the population to do the same. Nowadays, when someone demands that the right to free speech be respected while they openly present their most controversial views, what they are really asking for is the freedom to speak without having to analyse or explain their position. The struggle against the promoters of political correctness, considered to be the oppressors of free speech, carried out in the name of freedom and intolerance, seeks to repress any opinions that make one uncomfortable, thus hindering any social development capable of challenging the status quo, which favours straight white men. How the media manipulate collective thought and instill fear. One of the objectives of terrorism is to spread fear, anger, and mistrust, and it is no surprise to witness how the media play a role in this, doing a wonderful job of spreading hate. Think about the period just after the London Bridge attack when The Sun published an article entitled, "If we want peace, we need less Islam." Such a context explains the growth of public opinion that sees Pakistani people as the main instigators of violent acts of terror. Discussing these issues and trying to prove that they have absolutely no foundation, which is the goal of the author's radio programme, can sometimes, instead of helping people, realise how much they are indoctrinated by the media, lead to the fateful expression of freedom of speech, which in this case would imply the freedom to be able to present speculative opinions without being contradicted. There is an underlying basic truth. Some people are determined to believe that others are fundamentally evil, and that a certain ethnic group is more inclined to commit crimes. Unfortunately, these people do not realise that they are prey to a hate that is as old as humanity itself. People no longer question what they read in the various information sources, whether they are social media or newspapers. A prime example of this is the story of a radio listener on the O'Brien radio show. The listener, Ray, explained on the show how his rage towards Islam and Muslims grew by the day as he continued to read the news and information online. He had become unbearable even for his family, until his wife asked him to take a month's break from the internet. Without being fed the constant hatred, Ray's anger faded, and he returned to his peaceful existence. Slogans are the best way to force the public not to think whilst convincing them that they are in fact thinking for themselves. For years in the UK, the idea that the EU limited the country's freedom and imposed unwelcome laws was constantly repeated. This opinion was present for so long, going unchallenged by the media, that it became an absolute truth for millions of people, many of whom accepted it without ever being able to even give one example of the negative impact that the EU had on the UK. The slogans that were used and repeated by the promoters of Brexit, such as "Take Back Control," "Sovereignty," or "Anglosphere," seem meaningful and helpful in a debate, but they are nothing more than empty words with no clear meaning that discourage independent thought and help avoid the real facts. The biggest threat to Brexit would have been to ask people to explain their reasons for voting for Britain to leave the EU. The slogan strategy was also used by the United States President Donald Trump during his electoral campaign to relieve his electorate of the heavy burden of having to think with their own minds. Trump promoted simple slogans that were easy to remember, such as "Make America Great Again." Not only were they easy to remember, slogans were the perfect weapons to use against the truth. For example, the expression "fake news," which Trump used to present alternate realities in which his lies were broadcast as the truth. The process is very simple. Take a group of individuals who are angry and disappointed, pretend to understand what they are going through, offer them a scapegoat towards whom they can target their anger, and finally help them not to think too much by offering them some catchy slogans, claiming that anyone who forces them to explain what they mean is only stifling their right to free speech. The cause of public anger can be changed and redirected by the media. Over the years, the cause of all problems in society reported by the media has constantly changed, from single mothers to immigration. However, one of the ever-present scapegoat themes is homosexuality. The media and political institutions are still reluctant to teach in schools that homosexuality is perfectly normal. This is because, as with other issues, poisoning public opinion in one area can lead to financial gain in other sectors. In recent years, the attention and accusation on diversity has been transferred to transsexual women. We saw an example of this in an article written by Richard Littlejohn in the Daily Mail in 2012, entitled "He's Not Only in the Wrong Body, He's in the Wrong Job." The article was about Lucy Meadows, an elementary school teacher who had undergone a sex change, and its crass, invasive tone had devastating effects. 2 months after the article was published, Lucy Meadows committed suicide. Although there are many different facets to the issue of transsexuality, to which the author himself admits he has no answers, such as whether self-identification is as harmless as its defenders insist, or whether the problem of men who pretend to be transsexuals to commit rape is as serious as some say, the only thing that the author O'Brien is sure of is that uninformed journalism that is aimed at fueling hate can only bring out the worst side of the world and everyone in it. Incels: how groups of straight white men think that they are the victims of discrimination over the last century. Incel is an abbreviation for involuntary celibates. They are a group of white supremacist men that believe in forced monogamy, described by psychology professor Jordan Peterson as a solution for maintaining social stability. According to Peterson, in a world where people can freely choose their sexual partner, they will automatically be attracted to successful men, thus reducing the remaining half of the male population to involuntary bachelors. Peterson's ideology offers men an excuse for their failures by absolving them of all responsibility, and reduces women to empty vessels, simply intended to satisfy the sexual needs of the male gender. The years of struggle for women's rights and all the progress achieved along the way can easily be nullified by these new, radically misogynistic ideas. On the internet, misogyny and abuse have reached extremely high levels, and we must understand that it has never been any other way. Verbal and physical harassment and abuse will not end if society does not change and finally refuse the constant objectifying of the female body. The selfish ideology transmitted through derogatory use of expressions such as nanny state. The media often uses expressions such as virtue signalling and nanny state in a pejorative sense to suggest that all acts of altruism or generosity are performed only to receive admiration, or that the state should take on the role of protecting individuals from themselves. This vision is especially supported by taxpayers who see the money that they spend on taxes being used to fund services that they do not directly benefit from. It could be called a selfish ideology. Very often the term nanny state is used along with economic freedom to spread the idea that the state should not introduce laws that protect the consumer and get in the way of large multinationals, thus promoting unbridled capitalism. The prospect is a society where money is the most important element, and the expression freedom of choice is used to disguise a system that continues to make the rich richer at the expense of the poor. How to help people to begin to think again. In a world in which we are more inclined to spread tailor-made conflict instead of presenting the facts and pushing for logical reasoning, the only solution is a total transformation of the media. Newspapers and information sources must be the voices of truth. They must push people to think for themselves, using targeted questions to get to the bottom of people's motivations behind certain opinions. We must create an environment in which politicians are not comfortable with making cutting statements without explaining their reasons because they are sure that it will soon be forgotten. Quotes, "Progress that we once naively believed to be permanent can be easily undone. I realised quite early in my broadcasting career that even the most passionately held prejudices are vulnerable to the simplest of questions. If you don't think about things, you will never understand them. But with a couple of clever-sounding sound bites, you might kid yourself, and others, that you do." Take-home message. To combat this new wave of hatred that is spreading around the world, the first step is to push people to think. How do we do that? Just ask them to explain their opinions by asking them direct questions that aim to go beyond the catchy slogans spread by the media and to find the deep-seated rationale behind every opinion and point of view.